There's a specific moment when you realize you've been living someone else's life. Not dramatically, quietly. You're sitting alone, maybe driving, maybe staring at your reflection, and something whispers, "I don't recognize this person anymore." Carl Jung believed this moment isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. The death of who you pretended to be, and the birth of who you've always been. But most people run from this death, and in running, they never truly live. If you're ready to stop running, stay with me. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a decision that was completely authentically yours? Not influenced by what your family would think, not shaped by what society expects, not driven by fear of judgment or the need to prove something. Just yours. Most people can't answer that question, because most people have never made such a decision, not because they're weak, but because they've spent their entire lives building an identity that isn't theirs. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask, the character you play to survive in the world. And here's what makes it so insidious. You don't realize you're wearing a mask. You think the mask is your face. Think back. When you were a child, you expressed yourself freely. You cried when sad, laughed when joyful, said what you thought, wanted what you wanted. You were unfiltered, raw, real. But then something happened. Someone told you to stop being so sensitive, to be realistic, to calm down, to fit in. And slowly, piece by piece, you learned that being yourself wasn't safe, that authenticity had consequences, that acceptance required performance. So you adapted. You learned which parts of yourself were acceptable and which needed to be hidden. You constructed a version of yourself that the world could tolerate. And over time, that constructed version became so familiar that you forgot it was constructed at all. Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon. He understood that every human being develops a persona. It's necessary. We need it to function in society, to maintain relationships, to hold jobs, to navigate the complex social world. But the problem isn't having a persona. The problem is identifying with it completely, believing that the mask is your true face. And when you do that, something dies inside you. Not dramatically, quietly. A slow suffocation of the parts of yourself that don't fit. The character you're playing. Have you ever felt it? That quiet ache, that sense of living behind glass, going through the motions, saying the right things, playing the role, but feeling empty inside. That emptiness isn't depression. It's not something wrong with you. It's your authentic self suffocating beneath the weight of the persona. It's the real you trying to breathe. Jung believed that modern society creates this problem systematically. We reward conformity. We punish authenticity. We teach people from childhood that love is conditional, that acceptance requires performance, that being yourself is a luxury you can't afford. And so we all become actors, playing roles, reciting scripts, living lives that look good from the outside but feel hollow from within. But here's where it gets even deeper. The parts of yourself you rejected, the qualities you deemed unacceptable, they didn't disappear. They went somewhere, into what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is everything you are but refuse to acknowledge. Your anger, your selfishness, your vulnerability, your desires, your fears. Everything you've pushed down, locked away, pretend it doesn't exist. And the shadow doesn't stay quiet. It shows up in unexpected ways. Through sudden outbursts of emotion you can't explain. Through self-sabotage that seems to come from nowhere. Through attraction to people who embody the qualities you've rejected in yourself. Have you ever intensely disliked someone and couldn't quite articulate why? Jung would say they're showing you your shadow. The qualities in them that trigger you are the qualities you've rejected in yourself. This is projection. We see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. But here's the paradox. The shadow isn't just negative. Within it lies incredible power, creativity, passion, strength. All the parts of yourself you deemed unacceptable often contain your greatest potential. Jung wrote something that most people misunderstand. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Most people think finding yourself means discovering your best qualities, your strengths, your virtues. But Jung knew better. Finding yourself means facing your shadow, confronting the parts of yourself you've spent your life running from. And that's terrifying, because it means admitting things you've denied for years. It means looking at your anger and understanding where it comes from. Looking at your fear and seeing what it's protecting. Looking at your shame and recognizing it was never yours to carry. This is where most people stop. They want transformation without confrontation. They want to find themselves without facing themselves. But it doesn't work that way. Jung was clear. The journey to the self requires descent. You can't rise without first going down. You can't become whole without integrating the fragments. You can't find yourself without losing the version of yourself you've been clinging to. And that loss feels like death. Not a physical death, a psychological one. The death of the identity you've built. The death of the stories you've told yourself. The death of the comfortable illusions that have kept you safe but small. This is what Jung called the dark night of the soul. The moment when everything you thought you were dissolves, and you're left in the void, uncertain, unmoored, not knowing who you are anymore. Most people run from this moment. They distract themselves. They numb themselves. They rebuild the persona faster than it can crumble, because sitting in that uncertainty and that emptiness feels unbearable. But Jung would tell you something different. He'd tell you that this death is necessary, that the dissolution of the false self is the only way the true self can emerge, that you have to lose yourself before you can find yourself. And in that loss, in that darkness, something profound happens. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop holding yourself together through sheer will. And in that surrender, in that letting go, you finally meet yourself, not the version you constructed, not the character you've been playing, but the raw, unfiltered, authentic self that's been buried beneath the performance. All along, this is the beginning of individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming whole, of integrating all the parts of yourself, the light and the shadow, the persona and the authentic self, the conscious and the unconscious. But individuation isn't a destination. It's a lifelong process, a continuous unfolding, a constant return to yourself. And it begins the moment you stop running from your own darkness. So here's the question. Are you ready to face what you've been avoiding? Are you ready to let the false self die so the true self can live? Because what comes next will show you exactly how to do that. If the persona is the mask we show the world, and the shadow is what we hide, then what lies beneath both? Jung spent his life exploring this question, and what he discovered challenges everything we think we know about identity. He realized that beneath the personal unconscious, beneath our individual experiences and repressed memories, there exists something deeper, something universal, something he called the collective unconscious. This is not just your personal history. It's the accumulated wisdom, patterns, and experiences of all humanity, inherited not through genetics but through the psyche itself. And within this collective unconscious live the archetypes, universal patterns that shape how we think, feel, and behave. Think of archetypes as psychological blueprints. The hero, the sage, the lover, the rebel. These aren't just characters in stories. They're forces within you. Patterns that influence your choices, your relationships, your entire life. But here's what most people don't understand. You're not just one archetype. You're all of them. And the journey of finding yourself is about recognizing which archetypes are active in your life and which have been dormant. For example, consider the hero archetype, the part of you that wants to overcome, to achieve, to prove yourself. This is the voice that says, I can do this. I will rise above. But the hero can't exist without its opposite, the victim, the part of you that feels powerless, controlled by circumstances, unable to escape, Most people identify with one and reject the other. They either play the hero, constantly striving, never resting, or they play the victim, constantly suffering, never taking responsibility. But Jung would say both are incomplete. True strength comes from integrating both, recognizing when you need to fight and when you need to surrender, when to take action and when to let go. This is the dance of opposites, and it exists everywhere in your psyche: masculine and feminine, logic and intuition, order and chaos, light and dark. Jung called this tension enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually transforms into its opposite. That psychological health requires balance, not dominance of one side. And here's where it gets personal. Within every man exists a feminine aspect Jung called the anima, and within every woman exists a masculine aspect Jung called the animus. These aren't about gender in the physical sense. They're about energetic qualities. The anima represents intuition, emotion, creativity, receptivity. The animus represents logic, structure, assertion, direction. When these energies are balanced, you feel whole. But when they're out of balance, you feel fragmented. A man who rejects his anima becomes cold, disconnected from emotion, unable to access intuition or vulnerability. He lives entirely in his head, cut off from his heart. A woman who rejects her animus becomes passive, unable to assert herself, afraid to take up space. She lives entirely in receptivity, afraid of her own power. But when you embrace both, when you integrate these opposite energies, you become complete. You can be strong and soft, logical and intuitive, assertive and receptive. You become fluid rather than rigid, whole rather than fragmented. Jung believed that most psychological suffering comes from this fragmentation, from rejecting parts of ourselves because they don't fit our idea of who we should be. But the moment you stop rejecting and start integrating, everything changes. You stop seeing your emotions as weaknesses and start seeing them as information. You stop seeing your desires as shameful and start seeing them as guides. You stop seeing your fears as failures and start seeing them as protectors. Everything you've rejected becomes a teacher. Everything you've hidden becomes a source of power. But integration isn't easy. It requires looking at the parts of yourself you've spent your life avoiding. It requires sitting with discomfort, with uncertainty, with the parts of yourself that don't fit neatly into the story you've been telling. And here's the hardest part. It requires letting go of control. Because you can't force integration. You can't think your way into wholeness. You have to feel your way there. Jung emphasized the importance of symbols, dreams, and creative expression as pathways to the unconscious. He believed that the unconscious speaks in images, not words, in metaphors, not logic. When you dream, you're receiving messages from your deeper self. When you create art, you're expressing what words can't capture. When you feel drawn to certain symbols or stories, you're being guided toward integration. But most people ignore these messages. They dismiss dreams as meaningless. They suppress creativity as impractical. They override intuition with logic. And in doing so, they cut themselves off from the very guidance that could lead them home. So if you want to find yourself, start paying attention to your dreams, to your intuitions, to the patterns that keep showing up in your life. Ask yourself, what am I being shown? What part of me is trying to emerge? What have I been avoiding? Because the unconscious is always speaking. The question is whether you're listening. And when you finally start listening, when you stop resisting the messages from within, something profound happens. You begin to see yourself not as a fixed identity, but as a process. Not as a finished product, but as a work in progress. Not as someone who needs to be perfected, but as someone who needs to be known. And in that knowing, in that deep acceptance of all that you are, you touch something Jung called the self. Not the ego, not the persona, but the totality of who you are. The integration of conscious and unconscious. Light and shadow. Known and unknown. This is the destination of individuation. Not perfection, wholeness. And it changes everything. We've explored the persona, the mask you wear, the shadow, the the parts you hide, the archetypes, the universal patterns shaping your life. But now we must confront the deepest truth of all. The self you think you are doesn't exist. Not in the way you believe it does. You see, most people go through life assuming they are a fixed, stable entity, a consistent self that moves through time. You think, I am this person. This is who I've always been. This is who I'll always be. But Jung, along with mystics and sages throughout history, understood something radical. The self is not a thing. It's a process, a continuous becoming, an ever-unfolding mystery. What you call I is just a temporary constellation of thoughts, memories, and identifications. It's a story your mind tells to create continuity. But beneath that story, beneath the narrative of self, there is something far greater. Jung called this the self with a capital S, the totality of the psyche, the union of conscious and unconscious, the integration of all opposites into a unified whole. And here's the breakthrough. You are not separate from this totality. You are it. You've always been it. You just forgot because you became identified with the small self, the ego, the limited sense of I that believes it's separate from everything else. This is the ultimate illusion, separation. You think you are this body, this mind, this collection of experiences, but Jung would tell you that you are something infinitely larger. You are connected to a vast field of consciousness that extends beyond your individual existence. You are not just yourself. You are the accumulated wisdom of your ancestors, the archetypal patterns of humanity, the living expression of something timeless. But to realize this, you must die to the illusion. You must let go of the limited sense of self that keeps you trapped in separation. And this is terrifying, because the ego fights to survive. It doesn't want to dissolve. It clings to its stories, its identities, its sense of being special and separate. But the moment you stop clinging, the moment you surrender to the dissolution, something miraculous happens. You don't disappear. You expand. You realize that what you thought was you was just a fragment. And beneath that fragment lies infinite depth. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you truly are requires letting go of who you think you are. It requires sitting in the void, in the unknown, in the space between death and rebirth. Most people never do this. They live their entire lives identified with the small self, the ego, the persona. They chase external validation, believing it will make them feel whole. They accumulate achievements, believing they will finally feel enough. But no matter how much they achieve, no matter how much they acquire, the emptiness remains. Because they're trying to fill a void that can't be filled from the outside. The only way to fill it is to realize it was never empty, that what you've been seeking has been within you all along. This is the final realization, the one that shifts everything. You are not broken. You are not incomplete. You are not lacking. You are whole. You always have been. You just forgot. And the journey of finding yourself is simply the process of remembering. So here's what you must do. Stop searching outside yourself for answers. Stop waiting for permission to be who you are. Stop performing for approval that will never satisfy. Instead, turn inward. Sit with yourself. Not the self you present to the world, but the self that exists beneath the performance. The self that feels. The self that doubts. The self that longs for something more. Listen to that self, honor it, give it space to speak. And when it does, when you finally hear the voice that's been whispering, beneath the noise you'll realize something profound. That voice isn't new. It's been there all along. Waiting. Patient. Knowing that one day you'd stop running and finally come home to yourself. Jung believed that the journey of individuation is the most important work a human being can do. Not because it makes you special, but because it makes you real. When you find yourself, you stop living according to scripts written by others. You stop seeking validation from external sources. You stop fragmenting yourself to fit into boxes that were never meant to contain you. You become whole, integrated, authentic. And from that place of wholeness, everything changes. Your relationships deepen because you're no longer projecting your shadow onto others. Your work becomes meaningful because it's aligned with your true nature. Your life becomes yours because you're finally living it, from the inside out. But it all begins with one simple act: the willingness to face yourself, all of yourself, without judgment, without fear, without the need to be anything other than what you are. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But when you make the unconscious conscious, when you integrate the shadow, when you embrace all that you are, fate becomes choice, reaction becomes response, and life becomes something you create rather than something that happens to you. So the question is no longer, who am I? The question is, am I ready to stop pretending? Because life doesn't begin when you find yourself. Life begins when you stop hiding from yourself. And the moment you stop hiding, the moment you step into the fullness of who you are, you realize something extraordinary. You were never lost. You were just looking in the wrong direction. Everything you've been seeking exists within you. It always has. It always will. Welcome home.